I refused to sign the birth certificate. That's the first thing I told the nurse in the delivery room, my voice shaking but steady enough for her to hear that I meant it. The woman in the hospital bed, my wife, Melissa, turned her head toward me with eyes wide and filled with something between fury and desperation. But even in that charged moment, staring at a newborn wrapped in a pale blue blanket, I knew I couldn't pretend. The baby was not mine. Everyone in that sterile white room, from the nurse to the doctor, felt the tension ripple through the air like static electricity before a thunderstorm. My chest tightened, and before the nurse could even speak again, I stepped back, my boots squeaking on the polished linoleum floor, and for the first time in my life, I knew my marriage was already over. But let me back up, because stories like this don't begin in a hospital with a refusal. They begin years before, with smiles and laughs and promises that feel unbreakable. My name's Daniel. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, the kind of guy you'd find tossing a football in the backyard or grabbing a late-night burger at Whataburger after a high school game. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. I worked hard, I kept my circle small, and I believed in loyalty above all else. And that belief is what made everything that followed cut so deep. I met Melissa at a cookout one summer, out at White Rock Lake where a buddy of mine had dragged me. I wasn't much for big gatherings, but the smell of brisket and ribs, the music, and the laughter carried on the warm breeze had convinced me to hang around. Melissa was standing by the cooler, her sundress catching the evening light, her smile brighter than the Dallas skyline at night. She asked me if I wanted a Shiner Bock, and I told her I'd take a Bud Light instead. We laughed about beer preferences, then spent the rest of the evening sitting on the tailgate of her cousin's truck, talking until the mosquitoes came out and the sky turned black. From there, it felt like one of those American love stories people post about on Reddit threads. Sweet, simple, full of little moments that stack up into something big. We went to Mavericks games together, argued playfully over which barbecue joint was the best in town, and took long drives down I-35 blasting George Strait or whatever country station came in clear. On weekends, we'd grab pancakes at a diner near Garland where the waitresses knew us by name. I thought we were building something real, brick by brick, memory by memory. Melissa was the kind of woman who lit up a room. Everyone seemed drawn to her, friends, coworkers, even strangers at the grocery store. At first, I loved that about her. She could make friends with anyone, and she seemed to have this energy that kept life from ever feeling dull. But looking back, maybe that was my first blind spot. I mistook attention for warmth, charm for loyalty. I didn't see the cracks forming, the ones that would eventually split everything apart. The first hints came small, so small they almost slipped past unnoticed. Like the time she came home from girls' night smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. Or the way she'd set her phone face down on the table whenever a text came in. She'd laugh it off, kiss me, tell me I was being paranoid. And I wanted so badly to believe her, to believe in us, that I swallowed the doubt like a bitter pill. Then there were the silences. You learn to notice them after a while, the kind of silences that fill a room not with peace but with distance. She'd sit scrolling through her phone, her lips tightening at messages I couldn't see, her eyes flicking toward me and then away like she was hiding something just beyond my reach. I told myself it was stress from work, or that maybe she just needed space. Couples go through rough patches, right? That's what I kept hearing from friends when I mentioned it casually over beers. But deep down, I think I knew. Maybe not the details, not the who or the when, but I knew there was a shadow in our home, something lurking between us that wasn't supposed to be there. And still, I held on. Because that's what you do when you've promised forever. Things got even more complicated when she told me she was pregnant. I remember that night clearly. We were sitting on the couch watching Monday Night Football, me with a beer in hand, her with a blanket pulled up around her shoulders. She turned to me, eyes shining, and said, "Daniel, I'm pregnant." My heart leapt. I pulled her into my arms, kissed her hair, and thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing to bring us back together, to fix whatever was broken. I imagined little league games, teaching a kid how to ride a bike, backyard barbecues with a swing set in the corner. But then the doubts came rushing back like floodwaters. The timeline didn't feel right. The distance between us hadn't changed. If anything, she seemed even more guarded. When I'd reach to touch her stomach, she'd flinch ever so slightly, like my hand wasn't supposed to be there. And then came the jokes from her friends. Little comments that pricked at me like barbed wire. "Melissa, you always keep us guessing," one of them had said at brunch. They all laughed, but my stomach twisted. I tried to shake it off. I tried to be the supportive husband, going with her to doctor's appointments, setting up a crib in the spare room, even painting the walls light blue after she hinted she thought it might be a boy. But each night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the doubts gnawed at me. And then came the hospital, the moment of truth. Melissa in labor, me by her side, gripping her hand as she screamed and pushed. Hours later, a baby boy was placed in her arms. I leaned in, expecting to feel the rush of connection, the flood of love everyone talks about. Instead, my heart stopped. The child's features, his complexion, his hair, even the shape of his nose, none of it lined up with me. It was a stranger's child in my wife's arms. I froze. My brain scrambled for excuses, for explanations. Maybe genetics played tricks. Maybe it was just the stress of the moment. But deep down, I knew the truth that I had been avoiding had just been placed right in front of me, swaddled and crying. That's when the nurse asked about the birth certificate, about signing as the father. And that's when I said no. My voice came out steady, but inside I was collapsing. Melissa's eyes shot daggers at me, pleading and furious all at once. The room went quiet except for the cries of the baby, cries that felt like they were echoing the end of everything I thought I had. I stepped back, my hand trembling, my breath shallow. And as I looked at Melissa clutching that child, I realized something I couldn't unsee. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake of timing or genetics. This was betrayal, sharp and undeniable. And I knew then that whatever secrets she had been keeping, they were about to come crashing into the open. And the worst part? I still had no idea just how deep her lies went. I walked out of that hospital room with my chest tight and my stomach burning like I'd swallowed acid. The nurse's eyes had followed me as I left, probably thinking I was some cold husband abandoning his wife and newborn. But the truth was so much uglier, and I couldn't spit it out in front of strangers. I drove home that night with the windows down, the humid Dallas air slapping against my face, trying to keep myself from throwing up right there in the truck. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I'd already made up my mind. I was going to find out the truth, piece by piece, even if it ripped my whole world apart. Melissa came home 2 days later, baby in tow. She tried to act normal, moving around the kitchen in her robe, adjusting bottles, humming lullabies like we were the picture-perfect family. But her eyes wouldn't meet mine. When I offered to hold the baby, she hesitated for a beat too long before placing him in my arms, like she was testing whether I'd actually take him. And holding him, I felt nothing. Not the bond people talk about, not the instinct to protect, just emptiness and rage. I told her I was heading back to work sooner than expected. Truth was, I was taking time off to dig. My gut screamed there was a story behind this child's face, and Melissa wasn't about to hand me the answers. I'd have to pry them out myself. The first thing I did was check our finances. Melissa never cared much for managing bills. That was my department. So I went through the credit card statements, every line, every charge. Most of it was mundane. Groceries, Target runs, takeout. But then I saw it. A string of hotel charges downtown. Not fancy hotels, but not cheap motels either. Places like the Hilton Garden Inn, nights that lined up with the girls' trips she'd claimed she needed every couple months. Each time, she'd sworn she was staying at a friend's house, sipping wine, watching rom-coms. Yet here they were, $187.42, $299, a $165.37, charges tucked between nail salon visits and Uber rides. I felt my hand tremble as I circled the dates with a red Sharpie. Proof, not suspicion anymore, proof she'd been hiding something. Next, I dug through her phone. Melissa was careful, I'll give her that. She kept it locked with Face ID, and she carried it with her everywhere, even into the bathroom. But she forgot one thing, our iPad. Months earlier, I'd set up the iMessage sync on it, mostly for convenience. She never noticed. And sitting there in my garage office, with the iPad glowing in the dim light, I scrolled through fragments of conversations she thought were erased. The texts weren't complete, but they were damning enough. Messages like, "I can't wait to see you again, same place as last time," or, "He suspects nothing, just a little longer." My blood boiled. There were no names, just initials. J. Whoever J was, he'd been around for months, maybe years. I printed screenshots, slid them into a manila folder, and shoved it under the seat of my truck. If Melissa tried to gaslight me, I'd have the receipts, literally. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to know exactly who this man was. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. One evening, about 2 weeks after she came home from the hospital, Melissa said she was heading to her sister's to drop off some baby clothes. My gut told me otherwise. I waited 10 minutes, then got in my truck and tailed her from a distance. She drove straight past her sister's neighborhood, past the little diner we used to go to, and pulled into a parking lot behind a hotel off the interstate. My heart pounded as I killed the engine and watched. She stepped out of the car, adjusted her hair in the reflection of the window, and there he was. A tall man in a ball cap, jeans, and a button-up shirt, waiting like they'd planned it down to the minute. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, and wrapped his arm around her like he owned her. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I didn't storm over, didn't yell or swing. Instead, I snapped photos with my phone, every angle I could get from behind my tinted windows. Melissa laughing, Melissa touching his arm, Melissa walking into that hotel like it was their home. Each click of the camera felt like driving a nail into the coffin of my marriage. That night, she came home with her story rehearsed, talking about how her sister had been so grateful for the clothes. I nodded, pretending to believe, all while the photos sat in my camera rolls like loaded bullets waiting to be fired. But the real nail in the coffin came later. A buddy of mine from work, Sam, knew a guy who worked in a private lab. I told Sam just enough of the story to get his help. Within a week, I had a DNA test kit in my hands. I waited until Melissa left the house one morning, scooped a Q-tip gently across the inside of the baby's cheek, sealed it up, and drove straight to the lab. The waiting nearly killed me. Days stretched like weeks, each moment a mix of dread and bitter hope. When the results finally came in, I opened the envelope at my kitchen table. The words blurred for a moment as my vision swam, but the bold line at the bottom cut through everything. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0. Not uncertain, not low, 0. I sat there for an hour, the paper trembling in my hands. It was one thing to suspect, another to know. Every fiber of denial in me shriveled up under the weight of that number. I wasn't this child's father. Melissa had lied, cheated, and tried to pin me with someone else's responsibility. I put the DNA results in the folder with the screenshots and hotel receipts. Together, they painted a picture Melissa couldn't wiggle out of, not even with her silver tongue. But still, I needed one more thing, a name. One night, while she showered, I slipped her phone off the nightstand and plugged it into my laptop. A simple data recovery program did the rest. Within minutes, deleted messages flooded the screen. That's when I saw it, her lover's name spelled out in full. Not just Jason. Jason was no stranger. He was someone I had shaken hands with at a backyard BBQ a year ago. He worked at the same office Melissa did, the kind of guy who always lingered a little too long when they talked, whose jokes made her laugh louder than mine ever did. And now I knew he wasn't just a coworker. He was the father of her child. I sat there staring at the screen, my chest heavy, my mind racing with every betrayal layered on top of the next. The hotel bills, the texts, the photos, the DNA results, and finally, the name. It was all laid bare, undeniable, ugly truth in its rawest form. The next morning, I poured myself a black coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the sun creep up over the neighborhood rooftops. Melissa was inside, rocking a baby that wasn't mine, humming softly as if she hadn't detonated our lives. I sipped my coffee and thought about what I'd do next. But deep down, I already knew. The time for quiet suspicion was over. The time for confrontation was coming. And when it came, I wasn't going to let her hide in the shadows anymore. I'd always imagined confrontation as loud, messy, maybe even violent. Shouting matches, slammed doors, broken dishes. But the night it all came to a head, I wasn't loud. I wasn't messy. I was cold, calm, and deliberate, like a man who'd already buried the emotional wreckage and was ready to swing the hammer of truth. It was a Saturday evening, warm air settling over Dallas with that sticky heaviness that makes a cold Bud Light taste like heaven. Melissa had planned a little welcome-home dinner for a few close friends and family, something to celebrate the baby and pretend we were the perfect couple starting our next chapter. I didn't argue. I told her it was a good idea, even offered to grill steaks in the backyard. What she didn't know was that I'd already planned the guest list in my head, and Jason was on it. I invited him through a mutual friend, played it off like no big deal. "Bring your buddy from the office," I'd said casually. "It'll be good to get to know the guy who keeps my wife sane at work." Melissa's face had gone pale for a second, but she recovered quickly, hiding behind a smile. That was the first sign she knew the walls were closing in. By the time the evening rolled around, the house was buzzing. Country music floated through the speakers, the smell of steak and baked potatoes drifted from the grill, and neighbors filled paper plates with food. Melissa moved through the crowd with that practiced charm of hers, bouncing the baby on her hip, laughing just a little too loudly at small talk. I stood at the grill, flipping steaks, waiting for the moment I knew was coming. And then Jason walked in. Ball cap, button-up shirt, just like the man I'd photographed outside the Hilton. He smiled that easy smile of his, shook hands, and acted like he belonged. Melissa's eyes darted toward him, then toward me, and I swear her hand tightened on the baby's blanket. I waited until everyone had their food, until the conversation settled into that low hum that fills a room when people feel comfortable. Then I cleared my throat, holding up my beer. "Hey everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. "Thanks for coming out tonight. I know we're here to celebrate family, new beginnings, all that good stuff. But before we dig into dessert, I've got something I want to share." Melissa froze mid-step, a glass of sweet tea in her hand. Jason leaned back in his chair, casual, clueless, though I caught the flicker of worry in his eyes when he glanced at her. I set down my beer, reached under the patio table, and pulled out the manila folder I'd kept hidden. "See," I continued, my voice steady, "family means a lot to me. Loyalty means a lot to me. And for a while, I thought I had both. But lately, I've been learning some hard truths." I opened the folder and pulled out the first sheet, the hotel receipts circled in red. I held them up so everyone could see. Melissa's been taking little trips, not with her sister, not with her girlfriends, with someone else. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Melissa's face went scarlet. "Daniel, stop this," she hissed, but I kept going. Next, the screenshots of text messages. Turns out, when you sync devices, secrets don't stay hidden. "He suspects nothing, right, Melissa?" I let the words hang in the humid air, and I swear I saw Jason flinch. Someone's fork clinked against their plate. A neighbor muttered, "Oh my God." Melissa tried to step forward, her voice trembling. "Daniel, please, not here. Let's talk." I cut her off, pulling out the DNA results and slapping them onto the table. The sound cracked like a whip. 0% chance. That's what the test says. 0. This baby isn't mine. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. Even the cicadas outside seemed to quiet down. And then I went for the kill. I pulled out the photos from my phone. Melissa and Jason in the parking lot, arms around each other, walking into the hotel. I held them up for the table to see. Here's the man who does belong. Jason, my wife's co-worker, her partner, the real father of this child. The crowd erupted. A couple of my buddies cursed under their breath. Melissa's cousin nearly dropped her drink. Jason's face drained of color as whispers darted through the patio like wildfire. Jason tried to speak, to spin it. "Daniel, man, listen." But I wasn't interested in listening. "Don't," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut. "Don't insult me with excuses. You two thought you could play me, thought I'd raise another man's child while you snuck around behind my back. Well, congratulations, the game's over." Melissa's tears came then, streaking down her face as she tried to hold the baby tighter, as if clinging to some shred of sympathy. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she choked out. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "You didn't mean for me to find out. That's what you didn't mean." And then, like something out of a movie, one of my friends pulled out his phone, recording the whole thing. Melissa noticed, panic flashing in her eyes, but it was too late. The humiliation was already public, already captured. Jason stood abruptly, muttering something about leaving, but the damage was done. His name, his face, his guilt. They were etched into the memory of every witness there. The baby wailed, the sound cutting through the chaos, but I felt no pull, no connection, just a heavy finality. I turned back to the crowd, lifted my beer, and said, "So, here's to truth. Here's to knowing where you stand, and here's to knowing sometimes the trash takes itself out." I downed the beer in one gulp, slammed the bottle on the table, and walked back inside the house, leaving Melissa and Jason to drown in the stares, the whispers, the shame. Behind me, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Not once. The morning after the confrontation, the house was eerily quiet. No guests, no chatter, no clinking of beer bottles. Just the faint hum of the fridge and the weight of silence pressing down on the walls. Melissa had spent the night in the guest room, door locked, baby crying on and off while she tried to soothe him. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, a half-empty Bud Light sweating on the coffee table beside me. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. I was empty, hollow, like all the rage had burned itself out and left behind only cold ash. I didn't wait long to act. Monday morning, I walked into a law office downtown Dallas with the manila folder under my arm. The receptionist glanced at the stack of papers, receipts, DNA results, photos, and gave me that sympathetic look people save for car accidents and funerals. "Family law?" she asked softly. I nodded. Within an hour, I was sitting across from a lawyer named Henderson, a sharp-eyed woman who didn't waste words. She flipped through the folder, her jaw tightening as she scanned the DNA results. "Mr. Carter," she said finally, setting the papers down, "you have an airtight case. Paternity fraud is serious. We'll file for divorce immediately. Custody isn't an issue. You're not the father. Financially, you'll be protected. She won't get a dime more than the law requires. If she and her lover think they can saddle you with responsibility, they're mistaken." Hearing it out loud, from someone who made her living in the trenches of betrayal, was both liberating and devastating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. My wife had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now the system was on my side. When I came home that evening, Melissa was waiting for me in the kitchen. Her face was blotchy from crying, her hair a tangled mess. She looked less like the radiant woman I met years ago and more like someone cornered, desperate. "Daniel," she started, her voice cracking, "we need to talk. Please, don't do this. I made mistakes, yes, but we can work through them. The baby, he needs a father." I set my keys down, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "He has a father. His name is Jason. Call him." The way her face crumpled, anger, shame, helplessness, all tangled together, was almost too much to watch. But I didn't waver. The papers were already in motion. The weeks that followed were a blur of court dates, signatures, and tense exchanges. Jason tried to stay invisible, but he couldn't hide forever. When his name appeared on legal documents, his smugness evaporated. Word spread through their office. People whispered in the break room. My friends who had filmed the confrontation didn't need to upload anything. Dallas had a way of talking, and soon enough, everyone knew. Melissa's family called me, some begging me to reconsider, others cursing me for embarrassing her so publicly. I stayed calm, repeating the same line. I didn't betray anyone. I just told the truth. One crisp Saturday morning, the divorce was finalized. I walked out of the courthouse with the sun shining on my face, papers in hand, and a strange lightness in my chest. The marriage that once defined me was gone, but so was the burden of lies I'd carried unknowingly for so long. Healing didn't come all at once. At first, the house felt like a graveyard of memories. Her perfume lingered on the pillows, the baby's crib sat empty in the spare room, and every corner held echoes of laughter that now sounded like mockery. I threw myself into small routines. Saturday mornings at the diner with a plate of pancakes, afternoons watching football with friends, evenings sitting on the porch with a Bud Light, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. One night, I found an old box of Melissa's photos and mementos. Instead of burning them, I packed them up neatly, sealed the box, and shoved it in the attic. Not out of sentiment, but because I didn't want her ghost controlling my space anymore. Out of sight, out of mind. The best healing came from the simplest things. My niece drew me a picture in crayon, stick figures of me, her, and her little brother, scribbled under a bright sun. She handed it to me and said, "Uncle Daniel, we're your family." I taped it to the fridge, and every time I saw it, I remembered there were still people who loved me without condition. Evenings, I'd sit on the porch, ESPN murmuring from the TV inside, and sip a beer while the Texas sky bled from orange to purple. Sometimes neighbors would wave, sometimes a friend would drop by, and sometimes I just sat alone with the cicadas buzzing. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't justice in the Hollywood sense. It was peace. And peace was enough. Melissa tried, of course. She called, left messages about forgiveness, about the baby, about starting over. I stopped answering. Eventually, her voice stopped too. Last I heard, she and Jason were living together in some cramped apartment, struggling under the weight of their own choices. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate, I just let it be. Because that's the thing about betrayal. When the storm passes, you realize you don't have to carry it anymore. You can set it down, walk away, and breathe again. I rebuilt my life slowly, one weekend at a time, fishing trips with friends, cookouts where the only smoke was from the grill, not from the fires of lies, even road trips down I-35 with nothing but music blasting and the windows down. The kind of freedom that feels like starting fresh, like being 20 again, with the whole road stretching wide open. Looking back now, I don't regret confronting Melissa the way I did. I don't regret exposing her in front of everyone. Not because it humiliated her, but because it freed me. It cut through the gaslighting, the excuses, the manipulations. It gave me clarity, and clarity is priceless. The baby, innocent in all this, will grow up knowing the truth. That's not my burden anymore. It's hers, and Jason's. They'll have to explain someday why their love story began in the ashes of deceit. Me? I'll keep my life simple. Pancakes, football, porch beers, and the kind of laughter that isn't hiding anything. Because sometimes, revenge isn't a firestorm. It isn't destruction. It's choosing peace over chaos, freedom over chains. It's realizing you deserve better, and then walking toward it, one step at a time. And if you ask me now to sum it all up, to put this betrayal, this mess, this rebirth into a single sentence, I'd tell you this. Sometimes the trash takes itself out.